It is my nerd world, and welcome to it, a Star Wars Plus show, and I'm your host, Jon Justice. Just got done, a few hours ago, watching episode 3 of the Ahsoka series on Disney Plus after watching the first 2 episodes for the third time. And I'm just going to be upfront. I absolutely love this series so far. What Dave Filoni is doing with Ahsoka is, at the moment, some of my favorite live-action Star Wars content that they've put out so far. And it's teetering close to some of my favorite Star Wars content that we've received in a long, long time. I want to talk a bit about that. Some negativity that I discovered online as well. So let's go ahead and dive into my thoughts on Ahsoka Episode 3.
Will you have a spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down?
So first off, I was online on one of my secondary X accounts. So I have a few X accounts. I have my @Jon, Jon Justice, my Nerd World. I also have one that I use exclusively for the promotion of my science fiction adventure series, EMBARK. That one is @EMBARK Books. So I was putting up posts earlier today ahead of watching episode 3 of Ahsoka, promoting my book series. And I was looking at the trending topics, and the trending topics were dominated by Star Wars topics. It was George Lucas and Disney Star Wars, and these were the ones that were trending. Now, they're curated for particular accounts, so it makes sense because this account almost exclusively, as I mentioned, focuses on my science fiction series, and a lot of the accounts that I follow on there are similar to that as well. I was once again annoyed and disappointed by the number of posts and links to videos with negativity around Star Wars, the Ahsoka series, the Disney version of Star Wars. I didn't even realize that apparently there's an entire segment of the fandom out there, I do that thing with my fingers, that doesn't consider anything that Disney has done as being Star Wars. And it's disappointing. I think a lot of this is driven by the fact that these are content creators that are doing this. And unfortunately, the negativity drives more views and more clicks and more listens to this particular content than the positivity does. And that's disappointing, to say the least. I've been critical. If you've listened to the show for any length of time, or if this is your first time watching or listening to the show, I have been critical as of late of some of the Star Wars live-action content. I haven't hid my disappointment of the Kenobi series, how the Book of Boba Fett didn't land on a lot of levels, and it really felt like it was TV and low budget, and just some of the decisions that were made, and even some of the decisions that were made within The Mandalorian Season 3, whereas Seasons 1 and 2, I had very little criticism. Thankfully, the Ahsoka series is bringing back my love of Star Wars. And what Dave Filoni is doing with the series, I really do think, is grounded in what George Lucas used to do. I want to address one of the criticisms, and then I'll get into some of my thoughts of this week's episode. One of the criticisms has been the fact that, and we'll be talking spoilers, obviously, on the show, if you hadn't figured that out already. But one of the criticisms is this idea of Sabine being able to use the Force. And this is obviously a focal point of the show. We're already, 3 episodes into an 8-episode series. And so, we're heading towards the halfway point when we get to next week. And clearly, there is training going on of Sabine using the Force, and this idea that anybody can use the Force. Well, if you go back to The Last Jedi, which I know is controversial for a lot of people, we can remember that regardless of your feelings of the film, there was a moment in canon in that movie when Luke Skywalker is training Rey, and the focal point of that conversation and training is the fact that anybody can tap into the Force. Now, if you don't like what Rian Johnson did, he wrote that movie, I'm just going to go ahead and quote directly from the master himself, George Lucas, who said this: a lot of people get confused about the Force. They see it as some special thing that you can find and pick up and put in your head, and suddenly you have the Force. Whereas it's always been designed so that every living being has the Force. The amount of Force, which is like talent or intelligence, is different in every person. Some of it is inherited, but it's no more than a talent. It's not something you can acquire. It's something you can learn to use. I have the power to lift that cup off the table using the Force, but I can't do it unless I've been trained to do it. I love this aspect of the Star Wars storytelling and the fact that we're actually focusing on this. I love the fact that Sabine has her ties to Mandalorian lore and legend and culture, because clearly she's Mandalorian. But she's also learning how to tap into the Force, which is something that we've been exposed to in the past as it relates to the mythology of Mandalorian lore. Now, getting back to the series itself, there's a lot of nods going on too, and I don't know if anybody else has picked up on this, and typically I go and say something like that, and if I search it out, I'll find it. Much like finding the Purrgil in the clouds above the planet, which we ended up seeing in this particular episode, which I thought was awesome, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. But in these episodes, there are intentional nods, I believe, to the original Star Wars series. I feel as if Dave Filoni is going out of his way to reintroduce Star Wars lore to a new generation that may not be as attached to A New Hope as I am, being 51 years old and having seen the original Star Wars film in the theater when I was 5 years old. Having watched now the first 2 episodes a few times, it was this last rewatch that I did that I really began to sort of see this. Once I started looking through the lens of the comparisons to A New Hope, it seemed pretty clear that, at least in my mind, this was intentional. We have an opening scroll, which we talked about last week in episode 1, leading into a shot of a large starship, right? Different angles, different kind of crawl, but very reminiscent to what we saw in A New Hope. In this case, we have a landing party on this particular cruiser, different than what took place in A New Hope, but similar, as one ship is docking with another ship. And then we have this assault that takes place with New Republic soldiers that are dressed very similar to what we saw in A New Hope. It all carries this A New Hope vibe. George Lucas famously said, and we've abused it as fans, this it's like poetry, it rhymes. It's happening within this Ahsoka series, and it's happening in a very clever way. You get to the shots of Sabine on the speeder in that opening episode, and I'm getting nods of Luke Skywalker in a speeder. And clearly, Sabine is playing the role of Luke in this series to Ahsoka. And you can use the Obi-Wan Kenobi analogy, you can use the Anakin analogy. It's the master-apprentice relationship that's taking place here. Now, you move to episode 3 this week, and clearly the training sequence, using the wooden swords, her wearing the face shield, even some of the dialogue as it was written. With the face shield down, I can't even see. How am I supposed to fight? I mean, it was almost lifted word for word. And I'm sitting back as a fan just smiling at every moment of it. Now, again, I have no idea. I'm not friends with Dave Filoni. I don't talk to the man. I can only speculate that this is all very intentional, because we're seeing a lot of the same sort of storytelling cues that I experienced when I was a kid the first time I saw Star Wars. Later on in the show, when Ahsoka's ship is being attacked by Shin Hati and those new starfighters, I'll get back to that in a moment as well. When Sabine goes into the back, into the gunner's chair, and they're taking on these ships, I mean, I immediately was like thinking Millennium Falcon, escape from the Death Star before they go to Yavin, and taking out the TIE fighters before they end up escaping. Again, doing that thing with my fingers. I really love the storytelling that's taking place, and I'm hopeful. As a fan of Star Wars, I think it's something that we all desire. You want more people to be exposed to it because you want your Star Wars to continue. And I really do think that despite the ridiculous, in my opinion, criticism that's been taking place of this series, it's really, really good. This almost feels like an entity of, in and of itself, even though it's placed in the Mandoverse. We haven't had any crossover yet, and I don't even know if we need to. Hopefully, it continues the quality that we've been receiving so far, because I'm liking these first 2 episodes of Ahsoka, and I'm feeling drawn to them and entertained by them, honestly, even more so than The Mandalorian. Now, this could be a byproduct of the fact that, for me as a fan, we're getting into what makes Star Wars special and the core of Star Wars, your master and apprentice, even though we have something similar taking place in The Mandalorian, but we're getting back into Jedi lore. We're getting back into Sith, even though these aren't Sith. Dark Side with Night Sisters. And again, it's all very reminiscent while being and like poetry, like an echo. It all feels like what we've seen before, but it's also fresh and new. Even the introduction of new starfighters. At first, I was a little bit taken aback by the design. They reminded me a bit in the chase of Shin Hati and Morok in those ships as they were chasing Ahsoka's starship. They reminded me a little bit of the ships from Wing Commander, for those that have seen that science fiction film going back to, the early 2000s. A film I quite enjoy, even though it did horribly in the box office. But I like the fact that we're seeing new ships, because we haven't really seen a lot. I mean, we haven't seen a lot of sort of new, fun designs, especially of starfighters. Mandalorian has introduced a few, but here you have a couple that are all sort of similarly crafted. We did get something like that in the early episodes of The Mandalorian Season 3 with the pirates, but I think I appreciate the design of these ships more than I do those particular ships. I want to go back to the beginning of the episode and any reservations I might have had about Hera from the first 2 episodes, which kind of fell away after watching those first 2 episodes a few times. They're completely gone now. The entire exchange between Hera and the senators at the beginning of the episode was fantastic. The tension that was built up in her conversation with Mon Mothma, asking for help on this mission and her being denied that. It does raise a question that I expect at some point will get answered, because Mon Mothma obviously leaves her position as senator to join the rebellion during the time of the original trilogy, and even going back to Rogue One, obviously, only to resume her position as senator at some point in time when the New Republic is formed again. So I can't imagine it was a circumstance where there was another election. Perhaps there was, and she was reelected to that position. Also has me wondering as well, are there House members for the New Republic, or are they all just senators? Not that it matters. I just thought that was kind of funny. But that exchange between Hera and those senators, and Hera showing, and Mary Elizabeth Winstead really bringing out what I remember of the Rebels version of Hera, and that forcefulness and the frustration. And of course, finally seeing our first live-action glimpse of Jason Syndulla, and seeing his desire to want to become a Jedi, raises, my eyebrows and to say, okay, well, what's going to happen there? Because there's obviously a big question of what happens to these particular characters by the time we get to the sequel trilogy, and I may have an answer to that. Funny side note on Jason Syndulla, if you remember from the epilogue of the final episode of Rebels Season 4, we were introduced to Jason Syndulla. He was sitting there in the second chair on the Ghost next to Hera before we got the meeting between Ahsoka and Sabine, which we saw the recreation of in episode 2 of the Ahsoka series. But his hair was bright green, and there was a leak of the Lego set coming out for the Ahsoka show, and it had a little minifigure version of Jason, and it looked as if his hair was going to be black. And I know the fans were like, oh, they obviously couldn't make the green hair happen. Well, if you watch the episode, you can tell that even though it's not bright green, it is dark green. So, yes, they did keep Jason Syndulla's green hair. And for what it's worth, I'm glad that they did. That makes all the sense in the world to me. But seeing Hera being a mother to her son, again, only served to continue to close that gap between what I remember from the animated character to this live action version. And of course they're going to be different. Ahsoka is certainly different. I think Sabine is probably the closest one-to-one representation, but it just has me more excited for the rest of this series now, because any issues that I might have had, they're completely gone away, and I'm clamoring for more episodes. And even at the length of this episode, clocking in at just about 30 minutes, it didn't feel short to me at all. Every moment seemed to matter. And we're also not getting, at least it would seem that way, we're not getting any filler episodes. This is going to be a continuous story, and it's one of the things that I really appreciate about the series, is that it really is more than likely going to feel like a long movie, much in the same way that I think Andor did. This is more my speed of Star Wars. We got some lightsabers, we got some more space action going on. This is the Star Wars that I grew up with, so I'm obviously liking it more than I did Andor. But I'm looking forward to getting the entire series and then watching it from beginning to end. I only wish that Disney would give us the ability to go from episode to episode without even bothering with the credits. I just want to be able to watch it as one big, huge movie. I've seen some speculation, getting back to the Purrgil just for a moment, the giant space whales. Seeing them represented in live action was awesome. Always love to see the big kaiju-esque creatures in Star Wars, and the special effects work obviously did not disappoint in the least bit. I have heard some fandom chatter, speculation that perhaps that the massive hyperspace ring that Morgan Elsbeth is creating could potentially tap into a Purrgil, trap it, and take them to another galaxy. Looking at the size of the Purrgil and looking at the hyperspace ring again, I'm going to go with my original theory that perhaps this hyperspace ring, either in and of itself, is just a hyperspace ring as they described, as Hu Yang described in the show. It is just a vehicle with that much power to jump from one galaxy to another. It may not attach itself to anything. I still think, though, given the fact that it is designed as a hyperspace ring, that was definitely done intentionally. Any ship with multiple hyperdrives in order to do that, to build a hyperspace ring, still tells me that, well, if you're going to build that to go to another place, then you're probably going to want to attach a starship to it to bring it on back. Which brings me to my theory on what potentially can happen. I don't have any spoilers. This is just, again, pure speculation. I haven't read anything that points in this direction. I've heard other people speculate about this as well. Specifically, where are these characters at the time of the sequel trilogy? At the time of The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and The Rise of Skywalker? Well, they could be in another galaxy. Now, from a more official rumor mill standpoint, nothing with regard to the story, but I have heard that there is potential for an Ahsoka second season. But even if there's not an Ahsoka second season, this season will serve to connect to the other series in the Mandoverse, culminating in that one big movie. With the strike going on in Hollywood, who knows when that's going to take place at this point in time, or even how soon we would get an Ahsoka season 2. But there is an argument to be made that if we end up using that hyperspace ring and our heroes, along with our villains, end up going to that other galaxy, that could be where the closing events of the last few episodes take place in Ahsoka Season 1 that we're watching, and everybody could end up remaining there. In which case, this would make sense as to why we don't see them in the sequel trilogy. We do see the Ghost during the battle of Exegol in The Rise of Skywalker, but we don't know who's piloting the Ghost. So, hypothetically speaking, you could have Hera, You could have Sabine and Ahsoka all off in a different galaxy, so they wouldn't have any idea what was going on in the galaxy that we usually reside in. And you could have a Jason Syndulla, older now, given the length of time that will have passed, piloting the Ghost as his mother once did in the battle over Exegol. They've got the wiggle room to have that storytelling based off of what's been laid out so far. Hopefully it's not going to be a circumstance where we end up losing everybody. And I think this is part of Disney's plan. We've heard some rumors of going to a different galaxy, that perhaps the Skeleton Crew will end up taking place in a different galaxy. We've heard speculation of potential directors of Star Wars films, Rian Johnson specifically, that his movies could take place in a completely different place we've never been to before, which would allow the opportunity to tell parallel stories to what took place in the sequel trilogy, just in a different galaxy altogether. It would be clever on their part, and I certainly would like that more than a world between worlds situation where we are pulling from timelines in this fantastical place where you can go and enter into other timelines. I'm kind of done with time travel and timelines from a number of different franchises and IPs. I like the idea of going to a different galaxy and telling stories there. As always, what do you think? Are you as hyped on this show as I am? Are you enjoying it as much as I am? Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or if you're watching up on YouTube, you can leave a comment there as well, and I'll share your thoughts coming up on next week's episode. Before I wrap up my commentary on this particular episode and get to your listener feedback, I just want to comment again about my favorite character in the series so far, and that is clearly Sabine. Natasha is doing an absolutely fantastic job with this character. And, every once in a while, you end up with an individual who just embodies a particular character so well. And seeing that this is a jump from animation to live action, and Sabine was a favorite character of mine during Rebels, but I liked all the characters. If you asked me to sort of rank them, I probably would have said Hera was my favorite, maybe Kanan, and then, with Sabine and Ezra underneath them. Sabine, with this performance in live action, has rocketed to the top. I hope that they utilize this character moving forward, that she completes her training with Ahsoka. I think obviously she's going to be able to go and tap into the Force at some point in time. But I really love what they're doing with this, and I hope that we continue to see this play out in further content, whether it's live action or big screen. I had to chuckle when she's trying to move the cup, because how many of us have done that ourselves? I mean, it was absolutely so relatable. And this show is just full of joy to me. And it's something that's been missing for a long time. I saw a post online, and I don't disagree with it, that Star Wars has a stoicism problem just in how stoic so many of the characters are, and especially Ahsoka. If I had any continued complaint so far, it would be that Ahsoka is still a little bit stiff, but really that's just based off of what we've come so used to in the animated series. And I mentioned this on last week's episode, that when you get later into Rebels, she's a little quieter and, a little calmer. Clearly, she's been through a lot. She's older. She's acting more of the mentor role. She's really kind of carrying that more Qui-Gon-esque, vibe about her. I'm enjoying it. I don't know if I would like it more if she were a little bit more animated, but this is the character that we're getting, and I trust in Dave Filoni in the way that he's writing it, that he's doing this for, clearly for a particular reason. So, as always, what do you think? TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or, again, you can drop me a comment up on YouTube, and I'll read that back coming up on next week's show.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Ray 2017 writes, these Mandoverse shows from Mandalorian to Ahsoka are only making me more appreciative of the sequel trilogy. I was just writing in another comment section that I actually like that this that these first 2 episodes have been slow and steady at the same time, because it's literally just the beginning to spread its roots underneath the soil before it begins to blossom. I don't get why some are so automatically blasting this series off to Kingdom Come already. And we just got started with this in its first week. I don't think anyone knows how to be patient anymore. I completely agree. And just let the story take its time and not feel the need to hold anyone by the hand as if it has to be awesome or action-packed the whole time. That's why we have superhero movies and other loud blockbusters, because we expect it to be a roller coaster. Universal Studios-sized thrills-like experience the whole time. Why do you think Andor did so well? Because that series took its time and began time to begin and became great once it was ready to really get the ball rolling. I prefer a slow and steady beginning that feels like an almost 2-hour movie with not much going on, but to keep it character focused over a rushed half-hour episode that had too much going on all at once, or not enough to make me want more, if you know what I mean by that, Miranda. I do know what you mean by that, and I want to expand upon that and add this. I put up a post on X the other day with regard to this. The commentary, and I talked about this a bit on the weekend defending Ahsoka show that I did, but I've heard some of the complaints around Ahsoka, and it seems pretty clear to me that a lot of the people that are complaining aren't really watching the series, especially the people that say they're lost. Having watched the episodes, as I've mentioned a few times now, they cover all their bases. We don't need everything spelled out. We certainly didn't in the original trilogy. And there are still questions to be answered in all of the shows that we have been watching. And if you pay attention, any sort of aspects that you may be lost on if you hadn't watched Rebels, they're covered in the shows. So I have a solution to this problem. I don't think it'll ever happen, and I certainly don't think the powers that be are watching or listening to this particular show. But I think it's an idea nonetheless, and I wanted to share it with you. Marvel's been struggling mightily. I even turned off a Secret Invasion. I may revisit it at some point in time, and this might be a good example of that, because perhaps I'm not giving it enough of a shot. That isn't to say that all of these shows have been great. I have my own criticism, as I've mentioned, of some of the live-action Disney shows. But if they want to solve this problem that we're having right now, focus on putting things on the big screen. I wish that there was a way where we could perhaps almost make a membership service and pay a little bit more, where we can go and watch these particular shows in a movie theater, even if they came out once a week like they do on TV. And I know that there's no mechanism in place and nobody is doing it at this point in time, except to say that a lot of the previews for Ahsoka and The Mandalorian have taken place in movie theaters, where they've invited podcasters and others and movie reviewers to a movie theater to watch these live action shows on the big screen. I think it would solve a lot of the problems that we have within the fandom for one specific reason. Not all of the problems. People are making a lot of money off of being negative. But I do think it would solve a lot of the problems, because there is it's a completely different experience when you go into the theater to watch a movie than it is to sit at home and watch a live-action TV show. At home, you've got all the distractions of home. You have family members. You've got your phone, probably the biggest one, the dog, you name it. And as I mentioned, so many of the complaints that I've heard about Ahsoka is, I don't understand it. I feel completely lost. I don't want to have to watch hours of Rebels or read Wikipedia. Well, you know what? You don't have to do any of that if you just locked in and pay attention. And I think a lot of people aren't paying attention. And this isn't a dig on anybody. It's just the nature of the world that we live in. You put people in a theater where it's dark and they're not allowed to have phones, because Nicole Kidman told us not to. They can get rid of that, by the way. That can go away. I'm tired of seeing Nicole Kidman when I go to an AMC movie. And she's not technically the one that tells us to put our phones away. That's the promo that happens before, which makes that all the more annoying, because we already go through the promo of getting your snacks and putting your phone away, respecting the audience, don't ruin the movie. And then we get another promo of Nicole Kidman going to a movie theater and telling us how great it is, but we're already sitting here. I don't need to see it. I'm going to watch a movie. I've already made the decision to go and give you my money. If you put people in theaters to watch this content, I think you're going to get a much more genuine reaction, where people are actually forced to go and pay attention. Again, I know there's no mechanism to go and do that. I wish there were, but there's not. All right, listen, that wraps up the show for this week. I want to mention I'm selling my science fiction space opera series, science fiction adventure series, EMBARK. It's available in ebook, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook. And now I'm also selling the paperbacks direct. So you can order them directly from me, so you can avoid Amazon altogether. You'll get them at a slightly cheaper cost. You're also not going to pay any more than $5 for shipping, which is a lot more than what you're going to get off of Amazon. And I will sign them for you. 7 books in all in the series. And again, if you are interested in purchasing a paperback, you still like your physical copies of books. I still like my physical copies of books and movies. You can purchase them directly from me. All you got to do is email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Tell me which book or books you want from EMBARK Book 1 to Book 7. And I will give you the information on how you can purchase them without having to sign up for anything. I'll give you a direct link to go and buy them. You're not going to sign up for any other service. I'm not going to spam you. I'll add you to the mailing list if you'd like. But if you just want to purchase the books, that's cool. Email me. Again, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. And again, I'll autograph them as well. And I usually get them in the mail within a day or two. So depending on when you email me, you can usually get them by the weekend, especially if you do it right after a show on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday after you've listened. If this is the first time that you're watching or listening and you don't know what these stories are about, here is the description for EMBARK Book 1. Katha's father died 1 year ago. Yesterday, he gave her the key to saving humanity. She just doesn't know it yet. The stars are within reach. Rival megacorporations D-Corp and Enercon have made interstellar travel possible and spaceflight available to the masses. But when an industrial accident inside D-Corp sets off a catastrophic chain of events, all of Earth is at risk. Meanwhile, when Katha Morrow suddenly receives a cryptic message from her late aerospace engineer father, fellow pilot Taft Guardia eagerly agrees to help her investigate. As the global evacuation begins, the ruthless Sin-Argam of D-Corp attempts to exploit the disaster and gain control, while Taft and Katha discover what may be the only chance of stopping D-Corp's evil leader before it's too late. Don't miss this fast-paced and action-packed sci-fi adventure. Treat yourself, your friend, or a family member. It's written for adults, but great for ages 11 plus. Buy EMBARK Book 1 today. Again, available in hardcover, paperback, audiobook, free on Kindle Unlimited if you use that service. And you can purchase those paperbacks directly from me. If you like your science fiction space opera to be epic, filled with some romance and a lot of action and cool spaceships, EMBARK is perfect for you, a friend, or a family member. Go to Amazon.com, search for Jon, Jon Justice, or you can hit the links at mynerdworld.net. Thank you so much for checking out this week's episode. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe button. Take more subscriptions. I really would appreciate it. Like and subscribe the show. Are we still liking and subscribing? I know we're subscribing, but are we still liking? I know you're hitting the bell to get alerted when new episodes pop up. But either way, subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it. So, again, thank you so much for listening and watching. I'll be back again next week with my review of Episode 3 of Ahsoka. And before I let you go, a quick thought on Foundation Season 2. I'm going to finish the series, but it's not nearly as good as Season 1. I know I've recommended it. If you haven't watched Season 1 of Foundation, I highly recommend you watching Season 1 of Foundation on Apple Plus. You can avoid watching Season 2. It's been nothing but disappointing. There are aspects of it where they begin to do what they did in Season 1, but ultimately it's just been a disappointment, and I don't know if it's because they got new writers. I don't know if they felt they needed to go another direction, but it just has not. The quality of the production has been almost as good, if not as good. And there are aspects of the story, but some of the secondary stories are just not working for me at all. I can't recommend Foundation Season 1 enough, but man, Season 2 has been a disappointment. I've heard that you got to get through the second half of the season and it really takes off. We're about there right now, and I'm not going to pitch off. I'll finish it. But man, it's been a big, big disappointment, unfortunately. I wish I had more positive things to say about it because I love to go and introduce people to new science fiction, but I can't lie. It's been a struggle. So check out Season 1 if you haven't. And if you have any thoughts to share about Foundation, again, drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. All right, that wraps things up. I'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.